Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here, and welcome to Andrea Trabucco-Campos, our new guest in the Design Talks series here at SPD. Andrea Trabucco-Campos is a creative director based in New York. He's also an SPD alumnus because he graduated from the Masters in Visual Design in 2014. And he's going to tell us about his experience collaborating with several important design agencies in New York. He started as an associate partner at Pentagram. He worked with the design studio, and now he's an art director at Greater New York. No, not creative director, sorry. So in his presentation, his focus will be mostly on how typography can contribute to developing a visual identity, which is both the two themes are very strong in SPD's Visual Design Masters. So I think this can be something you can really relate to. So thanks, Andrea, for accepting our invitation. And whoever has questions can send them through the chat, and I will ask them, Andrea, on your behalf. So ciao, Andrea, and looking forward to hearing what you're going to tell us about your career.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Hi, everyone. Not very long ago, I was a student like you at SPD. Definitely not during times like these. So you guys are like troopers for, being able to sort of navigate these waters. This is very unprecedented time, but thankfully you have tools like this that we can chat, and we're across the world and we're able to see each other. Thank you for making the time and coming in, and thanks Sylvia and the SPD team for inviting me. Very, very happy to be here. So let's get started. So today, as Sylvia mentioned, I'm going to be talking about sort of a little bit of my personal journey into design, into identity, and as it relates to type. To set the stage, immediately I'll give you like a rundown of who I am. And I think this probably speaks to a lot of you who have traveled around the world and are not just from one culture, but are multicultural. So I was born in Colombia in 1987. My mother is Colombian, she's from Bogota, but my father is Italian. So when I was 2 months old, they moved to Italy, where my grandparents were. And I lived there until, 5 years old, until 1992, where we went back to Colombia because there was an economic boom and my parents thought, hey, let's, go capture that. And they started importing marble into Colombia from Italy. This is me at the time. And at the time, I think I started having glimpses at like sort of being interested in typography. I would paint oil on canvas. I had an uncle who was doing that. And then in 1997, we went back to Italy, right? So Colombia, Italy, that ping pong game went on for a few years. It was in Italy that I started sort of copying classmates' handwritings, really being sort of taken by the fact that you could have different letter forms, but I did not know that language. I did not know any designers whatsoever. So I just was like sort of blindly touching things. And at the same time, I got really, really passionately in love with Dragon Ball Z. And I decided to code my first website. And so I was like 13 years old and I did not know what I was doing, and just like made a little website as a fan. In 2004, my parents decided to move to Miami, where they had met initially. And that meant I was in Miami for a bit, and then I went to NYU to study philosophy. I pursued and finished a degree in philosophy, which was really important. But up until that point, I did not know I was going to be a designer. I was like already in my 20s. It was only after NYU that I started working for a sustainable meat company, and a little bit of my coding came back, and I started using the code as a way to get into design. And the more I did it, the more I realized I knew nothing whatsoever So then, you know, I was doing a lot of design, and by that point I was like sort of doing freelance gigs and all of this, and I just had no idea what I was doing. So I decided to look around and found SPD back in Italy, where I was from. And you know, I came to Milan and met with pretty much every school and people from the schools, and decided that SPD had like the program that I was looking for, that I needed. It would give me the fundamentals, and it would give me the understanding in the history and sort of the projection that I needed. And it turned out to be the right choice, I think, very much so. So then in 2015, I went back to the States with my then girlfriend, who then we got married. And it was about at that point, after a few months of freelancing, I got an interview at Pentagram, got a job offer as a designer, started, and really began a 4-year journey with them, where I went from sort of mid-level designer to senior designer, and then after a few years, associate partner. And I'll go over a little bit of how Pentagram is structured, because I think it's an interesting way they're structured. And you know, just so that you understand how that takes place. But at the same time, I decided to go back to school again. So I was working full time, and then at night I would take these type courses at Type at Cooper. And my interest in type had grown from before SPD, then really super powered in SPD, by people like Silvia, or people like Marta Bernstein, Cristiano Bottino, Luca Pitoni, like people that were really engaged with the topic of typography in different ways and would pull the interest in different ways. I knew that I needed to get better at the craft, and went to Type at Cooper and did the extended program. So learned from really amazing people, the commercial type people like Christian Schwartz and Bertrand Hasebe, and it was really fantastic. I then got the opportunity to start teaching graphic design and typography at SVA, and that's I've been teaching ever since, like, I think 2016. And in 2019, I and my wife and I had a baby. He's now almost 1 year old, and it's completely changed our lives for the better. But it's really been a fantastic experience. And in that time, I was approached by Design Studio, which is a London-based company that has a San Francisco studio and a Sydney studio. And I was approached to open the New York office. I was 4 years into my Pentagram experience, and they were like, look, your portfolio, the way you understand design, seems all like congruent to what we're doing. And you know, they basically had this ambition of being in New York. So for a whole year, I was with Design Studio, building the office, hiring people, and really making that experiment a reality. It's still around, but I've since then moved on to Greta, where I'm a creative director, and I've been with them for about 4 or 5 months now, which has been quite an incredible experience, given the fact that 4 out of those 5 months has been online like this. So I know the team, I know the people that I'm working with because of that month where we were all in the office, but since then we've all been in Zoom. So we have Zoom relationships. So anyway, most of the work that I'll talk to today goes in Pentagram, and then my own personal sort of work. So before I go on, there's obviously a lot of people that I need to thank. I think some people are on the call, and I'm like so incredibly thankful to them. Silvia, Cristiano, like they're just amazing influences in explicit and implicit ways, in ways of thinking approach. But then from there, like I've had tons of help. You don't do this by yourself. You do it by creating like a circle of people, and these people seeing something in you and pushing you. When I got back to New York, Matteo Bologna was an incredible sort of collaborator, and then opened the doors to a lot of studios here. Then at Pentagram, my boss, Luke Heyman, who's a partner, was an incredible teacher and mentor until today, but as well as relationships with Paula Scher and Michael Berud, who were in the office. And the first weeks I was like, oh my God, this is Michael Berud. And like, I just couldn't believe it. But it was really fantastic to sort of get past that and then get to the fact that we're all design practitioners. And of course, they have an incredible amount of knowledge and understanding, but it's also, you have something to contribute. You have your own perspective, and it's quite unique. Type at Cooper, then a group of friends, which I'll talk to you about a little bit. And of course, all the way down to Design Studio, James Hurst, who's now the lead creative director at Pinterest. And then of course, Greta. Yeah, so going on. Identity for me has always been a battleground. As you saw from the timeline, and the only reason I have it there is to kind of give you a sense of something that you probably went through on your own. Which is just this sort of back and forth between countries that have really different realities. So I was born in Colombia, but I grew up in Italy. So Colombia's on the left. Italy, where I grew up, that's a photo I took from the place I grew up, is the polar opposite. It's a small town, rural, like in the middle of the country, between two small cities, which are Pisa and Lucca. You know, on the other hand, we have this like super boisterous, like vibrant place, which is Colombia. So for me, identity was always a place, a battlefield in a way. I did not know if I was Colombian, if I was Italian. And then when I came here to the States, and especially to New York, if I was New Yorker, and it's always been something that I've had to grapple with. I feel identity is an infinite tension, an infinite kind of polarization between things that accept and reject each other. And to me, typography became the place to kind of navigate and express that tension. So a little side note, I lived in Pontacerchio, which is between Lucca and Pisa in Tuscany. And we would go every summer to the beach, and especially to Versilia, where you see it on the map on the bottom left. That's in Tuscany. And it's there's this small town, relatively small, called Viareggio, which has all these establishments where you can go and, you know, rent an umbrella and be at the beach. But what it also has is this long promenade. And this long promenade is vibrant. It's full of like little shops that are just makeshift shops, but it also has an incredible amount of typography embedded in it. It's in every building sign, especially the older ones. These are some Libertine stuff from early, I think early 1900s or beginning of the 20th century. And then some other stuff that is like completely like from the 90s or 80s, you know, like the Mondo Disco. But I think as a kid going to this place, and I'm sure all of you have a similar experience in your own way, you absorb these letter forms that exist, and they connect directly with the place and are a signifier, a reference of what this place stands for. You know, there's more Spartan, more, you know, Art Deco. It can be a number of different expressions. But I think now looking back into this and knowing that I would spend mornings, entire days just walking around and looking at these letter forms, I'm not surprised now that I'm so respondent, that somewhat articulate in this world. To me, I think this is one of the most visceral places. You know, a sign maker made these, and they made certain decisions without knowing the whole history of the letter form. They just like did it. And this capacity of expressing identity through typography was something that is really, really powerful in signages. And it's visible all throughout Italy. So I think by researching, archiving, and honoring the history of typography, you gain the tools to articulate this tension that's inherent in identity. And moreover, once you start understanding how typography resonates within culture, then you get a lot of power into how you can make design culturally and collectively relevant. And obviously, this is a very important discussion today. I think we know that there's not one culture. There's not just the European culture, and within Europe, there's tons of other ones. I'm talking about like a larger sense of culture and microcultures and sort of microclimates within those. It's really important to understand where sort of the type comes from, where the design references come from, so that you understand how they articulate and what they activate in people as they see it. Okay, so having said that, one of the first projects I was a part of, and I was very fortunate to lead, is the identity for MasterCard. Super quickly, I'm not going to go deeply into this, but this was at Pentagram. It was a Michael Beirut project, which is one of the oldest and most important partners at Pentagram New York. And they had been doing the logo, they hadn't gotten it approved, and my team, which is Luke Heyman's team, got involved, and we were thrown into the project. And I think just by sketching and sort of all the process, I became the lead for the identity, while Mike Beirut's team kept on going with the logo. We both iterated and created hundreds and hundreds of logos, but the outcome is this: is really just a more sophisticated, minimalist, and a quite vibrant and approachable sort of identity that they carry on till today. So this was a massive project. It was a 2.5 years, but as you do projects in Pentagram, you get the chance to work on other projects, such as the National. So as I was working and leading the identity for MasterCard, there was also this. So Pentagram is structured where each partner has their own team. So just imagine each P stands for partner. And each partner has a team. And this team is directly responds to the partner, not to anybody else. So another partner might have an opinion about design, but the decision comes from your partner. So you're really working within a micro studio, and it's all part of the umbrella of Pentagram. Partners' teams are structured very horizontally. That means it's not this hierarchical thing. Under the partner, everyone's a designer except the project manager. But the designers are all called designers. There's no like mid, senior, those are implicit. The only title that you can gain after years of being there and having demonstrated that, you can take projects on your own is the associate partner. And I was very fortunate to get there and get that title. But for this particular project, it was really a relationship between the partner, the associate partner, one designer, and the National. And it really we get the ability to really communicate. So when you're in a studio like Pentagram, you get the knowledge of how to run a project, how to communicate to a client, how to present, and how to lead that. So a little bit of a backstory. This is the National. And the the second one from the right, so the guy in darker glasses, short, really, really short hair, is Scott. And Scott Devendorf used to be a designer and still kind of is. And he worked at Pentagram at some point where he met my boss at the time, Luke Heyman. So they were friends and they knew each other. And the National had been gone from the music scene for about 3 years. And they were set to relaunch a new album called Sleep Well Beast. And they thought, okay, well, let's not let Scott design this. Let's find somebody else. And they spoke to Luke, and Luke, of course, was over the moon. And that's how we got to work on it. So how this project starts is, the National, they're very visual. They've traveled the world. They're really, really knowledgeable about history of movements and political movements as well. And, situationism, which some of these images are from, which is a movement in France, mostly, but it's spread throughout Europe. And Sylvia can tell you the whole history much better than I can. But it's a really powerful movement that used typography in very spare colors. They really loved the energy that was here, the rawness in this. And they sent us all these images, and we were like, okay, cool. We're going to find even more. We're going to go deeper. But as we sort of sketched around this, we found out that, we needed something more. We couldn't just like replicate this visual. We needed to understand why. So we started building a mental sort of edifice, let's say. So we pretended that the National was a political social institution that really was founded by liberal, futuristic, idealistic a group of people. And these people published their papers and everything, their propaganda, from the barn, from their recording studio. I think there's somebody that is unmuted and it's creating an echo, but I'll keep on going. So the barn is really the Institute's headquarters, where propaganda pamphlets, music, and merchandise are produced and distributed. So we set out to create a corporate identity for that sort of liberal institution. So that's how it starts. And once we identify this kind of idea, which is a crazy idea, and only the musicians sort of are the type of client that will tell you, yes, do it. We were like super excited and got going. And we started building sort of from the barn an icon that could break up and refer to, you know, printed media that had like registration marks. And so you could see these little marks. We used blue, Reflex blue, which was a Riso printing color that we really liked. And we use the idea of forms. So bureaucratic form-like things. Like there's a sort of a liberal institution, they're printing out forms so that people can sign up. So we use that language and we select typefaces that kind of sort of enhance that idea. So things like styrene, which is a very, very beautiful sort of almost synthetical sans serif. And we connected all of this throughout the identity. So there were moments that were really loud, and we got those moments through the idea of Riso printing. So if you're not familiar with Riso printing, it's just a technique in which you take a Xerox machine, you convert it so it can print out these really vibrant colors. So things come out looking like this, like there's a little halftone effect. So we had to basically learn how to replicate this at a digital level. But we would take cues from the paper colors and the colors of the Riso printing, which are fluo colors, and really connect that and create sort of a language that can go from a very technical feeling place to a very raw and kind of, you know, sort of do it yourself type of thing. And then things are cut out at the edge and sort of, you know, there's registration bars and so on. So then we also were tasked with pretty much designing the whole thing. You know, we had to design how the vinyl would look like, how the actual premium sort of set of vinyls would look like, what the insert for the vinyl would look like. And we designed this newsprint type of thing with one side all the lyrics and the other side just a set of images. And of course, if we're making a corporate identity for this music slash cultural sort of peacenik institution, we needed to create brand guidelines. So we created this, and this has actually turned out to be very useful. We would send it to pretty much every single collaborator, agency, or venue that needed to do that. And then we worked with a really, really talented group here called the Collective Works, who designed the website. They sort of developed it as well. And they did a great job interpreting what we had established into the web. We also did things like sort of but out of home and posters for all the entire tour, or specific posters for each leg of the tour. So these were like mandated. Every single venue, be it in Oslo or, you know, Texas, they needed to use this particular layout, which was a lot of fun because we would get emails from all over the world saying like, is this correct? And we would be like, absolutely not. Please redo it. Or we would be like, yeah, great job. Keep on going. So there were a lot of things that we needed to create for the online, but as you see, once you establish like kind of like the basic cadence, which was like the elements, like the way we treated images, the color, and then moreover the typography, that's something that establishes cadence for the whole identity. This was a really fantastic way to kind of, you know, really get in, to construct the identity all throughout every touch point. Posters, merch, this was never done, but we did do tape, actually incredibly hard to do. You need to make sure that it sort of lands exactly in the same spot so that it's continuous. And then of course, if they're an institution that, you know, is publishing, somewhat bureaucratic, they're going to need things like staplers and tape and, you know, pocket protectors for their pens. And things that were really fun to do were murals. This is in London, and then this is in Williamsburg, and just really understanding how to communicate that was really fun. And I would say up until like I had been part of the Mastercard launch and had been part of a few other rebrands, and the response that was here was really, really exceptional. I think there's some music playing in the background. Okay, just mute it. Sorry, whoever you are. But okay, so one of the exciting things that happened is we were nominated with the band. So the band was nominated for Best Indie category. And then we were also nominated for Best Packaging. So that meant we were able to go and be part of the Grammys, and that was fun. This is literally the design team. There's Luke Heyman on the right, the partner, who sort of reviews and oversees the work, but rarely gets into the actual files, although he's definitely capable of it. Then there's Eliana, who is as a designer. She's still at Pentagram. And then there was me, who at the time I was still a designer, but about to be an associate partner. So it was a lot of fun because you get a lot of control. Things that happen afterwards are things like the music festival. So, we got a call and they were like, okay, there's this national homecoming concert that happens every year. And we would love you to design the identity. And we're like, national homecoming, that's interesting. So how about national coming home? So we already have an icon that we've sort of it's become like the hero, the symbol of the whole national. Well, we can extrapolate a arrow, and then coming home becomes sort of like the symbol for this concert. Just a very simple gesture, but something that we would embed throughout social and in the posters. And they really wanted this to be a little bit more exciting. So we took the tape and we recreated things that were like the arrow or the house, and put it all over. So all of these things were actually produced, and it was just like incredibly fun to see it. And we created things like towels and stuff that were used at the concert, and that was a lot of fun. And then after that, we had another opportunity, and this was Luke and myself were able to design this. And the photographer, Graham McAdoe, who is in the middle of the photo here, had been touring with them since the start, since they had really started many, many years ago. And we were tasked with designing a little zine for the exhibition in Cincinnati Museum. So for me, one of the main places I go to is my archive. So I have a library with a lot of books, and if I don't have them, there's an online set of resources that you can access. But I go to these books, and what I was flipping through it, I found this really interesting kind of reference that was Sao Paulo. This is Lettera, and Lettera is a 4-volume book series by Armin Haab, with different collaborators for different moments in it. Different volumes have different collaborators. But Armin Haab collected all of the top lettering at the period in the 1950s. And there's really incredible sort of uncompleted typefaces, like just pieces of lettering like this one. And I found that to be really interesting. So I started looking deeper. Have this book at home, which is an intense tome. It's a 1912 type specimen, but in it, there's a lot of these like sort of grotesque sort of sans serifs, which have had a really interesting kind of overlap. So let me show you how. Excursion, if you look at the C is very round on the outside, but somewhat straight on the inside. And I thought that round on the outside and straight on the inside was a really interesting kind of gesture to explore. So that's something that I started kind of sketching on glyphs, which was the type program I use, and just started looking at different range of weights, and then finally developed like a full uppercase for it, which then led back to, okay, I have that, let's typeset it. And Luke loved it, and the band absolutely loved it. So we were like, and of course, Graham himself loved it because it was his exhibition, but everyone was for it. So we used it as the masthead. And then, of course, we had to design this newsprint, which we printed at Newspaper Club in London. And it was really, really just fantastic to kind of go through the archives and have to make a selection, and going through the meetings with the whole, team, and with members of the National and the photographer, and just making sure that we were picking the right things and we were representing it. So here, yeah, you see a few of the spreads in it. It's very very photographic driven. But you know, type plays a role at giving you little sense and obviously opening the whole thing. So that is the National. And it's a quite extensive project where, yeah.
Yeah, can I ask you something? Because it really relates to what you've just shown. You applied the strategy of a traditional brand to a band. And we all know that usually in the music field, things work in a different way. So how did they accept this approach? And how did it turn out? What's your impression on this specific process?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something we talked about a lot. You know, the name The National already suggests some type of institution or bureaucratic sort of entity. So they've always, like throughout their history, you know, all the albums they've released, they always thought about like, oh, could we play with this idea of the National? And I think by kind of depoliticizing it, you know, not making it about politics, but making it about a broader idea, which is bureaucracy and identity for an institution in the music space. They loved it. Like as soon as we zeroed in, we had a couple of meetings with like Luke, Eliana, and myself, where we were sorting through all the references, and we started getting closer and closer to this idea. And we would send emails and sort of have a conversation with them. Once we zeroed into this idea of sort of an identity, a full-on corporate identity for a music band, they loved it, and it was a full go. And after that, there was no turning back. Then the whole machinery just turns, and any decision is run through that lens, which is the beautiful thing about ideas and finding out why you do things.
Thanks. I was so curious about this. Okay,
yeah, no, and I would say that at that point, there were a couple of other bands that were getting better at doing sort of larger executions. I would say, I forget the exact ones, but there was a couple in the hip hop and a couple in folk, like indie folk, that were starting to get good at it, but nowhere like this. Like this was very corporate, and even the attitude of it was really important, and spoke to the actual album and the way they sound, which was another thing, by the way. We listened to early stuff, sketches that they had done, and we needed to understand how to embody that into the design. So that's another check that was really important. Going on to another project is As If. This is a film festival. So the film festival happens in Irvington, where I'm actually located right now, which is 40 minutes away from New York City. I live in Brooklyn, but we're now here at my in-laws. And this started really as a small idea, I would say. It's just, let's have a film festival all about shorts. And the name was different, and we started sort of talking about the name, and this was a project that, it's a personal project, so it's an independent project. We started talking about the name and started really reconfiguring it. And All Shorts Irvington Festival sounded really good, but it also contracted into this acronym, which is As If. And As If in common culture here has like a very particular resonance. It's like as if, it's like, yeah, right. And it was something that had like an attitude embedded to it that was really, really interesting as a sort of sentence starter. So I set out to kind of, again, typography. How do you interpret this letter sequence in a way in which it relates to film, but at the same time relates to the attitude? And going through this book, and I recommend if you've never seen this book, you know, take a screenshot, download it, or there's a PDF online, but I would say buy it. It's worth buying. It's not very expensive. It contains a wealth of different typefaces and their history. This is one of a few books that does this really well, but it's only the starting point, right? So you're like leafing through, you get to this moment, and I saw this typeface called Ile-de-France. And I noticed that sort of in all of the arms, like the E, the F, the way those arms were handled it was like a projection screen. So it was like kind of like it was opening up. So then I started looking deeper into the history, found this online archive from Lyon in France, and it had much more. So I started really looking at it and really analyzing it and downloading as much as I could to really understand how it was constructed, and then started sketching on it. And just creating this idea of lens and sort of forward. And the two quotes that start the sentence as if. So it kind of implies that the sentence is going to go on. When you contract that with the sort of gesture in the F or the E, you get this, which is a symbol that refers to a number of things, like the cone, the director's cone, or a projection screen. So it became kind of like the main grounding symbol to the whole identity. As part of the identity, I did all of the visual part as well as the coding for the website, which is now a little outdated. But every season, what's beautiful about collaborating with a cultural institution is that they need to keep on doing stuff, because otherwise they get outdated. So every season, we would have to figure out the theme, and I would have to design around it. This was a series around sort of palette, so the idea of taste. And the idea was just connecting sort of palette as in visual form as a response to a physical manifestation of taste. So part of this meant I completed the typeface and explored different weight of ranges. The typeface is called Isola, which is the Italian translation to Ile de France. So I just kind of took it because I modified it so much that it became my own. And it's something that, again, like sort of the type is placed over the mouth so that the focus goes to the eyes and sort of that response. Super simple set of colors that connect with the actual taste, and then the typography. And this was sort of all that needed to happen for the film series of that season. And some of the cool things that happen is then people take it and they start playing with it. And they start doing things with the identity itself. So another season was the fall 18 season. And this was Film a Stream. So the idea of dreaming and sort of the slumber, going into sleep and out of sleep, is something that is hard to capture, but this was, I found a way in here, which was when you close your eyes and open your eyes, things go from blurry to unblurry. And being able to capture that at a sort of visual level in a very simple way, using typography, which again, this is a custom typeface for the theater. So whenever it was used, it would connect to the identity of the theater. People would connect it. And then adding this gesture of both the blurring of the type and then these backgrounds that are kind of ethereal, blurred backgrounds of different scenes. That's something that created the thread for the whole identity. And then it's a matter of playing it out. These are postcards. This is a stretch, is really animating the printed version, which are definitely not animated. So that's just for showcase, but really this is how the printed out programs at the festival would look like. So, and there's a neat thing that happens, which is at the end of the festival, people can vote on the actual film that they like the most. So there's an audience awards. And then things like for each movie, we had a custom sort of title set that would tell you, demarcate when a new short started. So it was a lot of fun. I got to collaborate with a friend, Brian Parker, who has a studio here in New York City called Moon, and they make music. So he made the track, and I told him the brief, Film as Dream. I showed him some of the graphics, and he went off and sort of created this on that scene. So it was pretty cool. But I would say what happens when you create a relationship with someone, be it an institution, a person, whoever it is that it tends to grow if you're both engaged and excited. So the film festival led to this, which is the Irvington Theater itself. The theater is where the film festival took place. The theater had been branded many years ago and wanted to be rebranded. So they asked me, because the film festival had gone so well, it had created a lot of energy within sort of the towns here, and it was a nice opportunity. The project was large enough. This is another independent project, so just bear in mind, at the same time I'm working at Well, in this case, I'm working at Design Studio. For the film festival, I'm working at Pentagram. So I'm doing that on my own time at night, in the morning, or in the weekends. And for this project, I felt it was important to bring in somebody I trusted to collaborate with. And I love collaborating. It's a very important part of my practice. So I brought in Javier Arisu, who is part of Practica. Practica is a studio in Barcelona. And they're really fantastic. There are 5 members. 4 of them are in Barcelona. One of them, Javi, is here in New York. And I worked with Javi at Pentagram, so I knew him really well. And we're really good friends. And I thought this was a great opportunity to kind of collaborate. So basically, this is just a note to say, work with people that you like and you have fun, and hopefully it'll lead to more fun. And that's it. The theater has a long history. 1902 was the year the town hall was founded, and 1912 was the year the theater was opened. This is a recent photo I took. It just shows you kind of like the aesthetic. It's aesthetic from the 1912s. It's a pretty large theater. You know, it's not a massive theater, but for the area, it's definitely one of the largest theaters that there is. And they were looking from a strategic standpoint to really shift into becoming the cultural center for the region. So for all the towns on the Hudson River, for them to have a diverse range of programs, to really diversify the offering that they were doing, and then to talk about the wealth of events throughout the season, because they have a lot of stuff. So Javi, who's on the left, and myself, who I'm on the right, went through their archives. And this is a lot of fun. I highly suggest you do this like for any project as a way to geek out and find a lot of cool stuff. But as we were going through the archives, we were like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff that was happening in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Like, and we started seeing threads of this. Like, it was very simple design in the sense that, you know, the production methodology was color paper printing on top so that a small town printer could do it. So what was really cool, we were seeing all this vibrancy across like different productions. But it all felt like it was being produced in a similar idea. You know, there's like an image or a type image at the center, and then the details up and top. This actually reminded us of something else that I'll go into. But as part of personal practice, again, going into books. So these are some of the type specimens. This time I went into 1912, another 1912, but this Barnhart and Brothers, which was a different type foundry, really amazing. These type specimens, by the way, you can find on eBay. You just need to look and stay attentive, and once in a while they pop up. But I found this Gothic called Modern Gothic that hadn't been revived, and it's from 1912s. And what's incredible is it had certain traits that are compatible to Helvetica, which would only get published like 40 years after. So it's like kind of before its time in a way. And it has a lot of quirky stuff, but I felt that the architectural feeling of the uppercase was something that was really, really interesting for the nameplate itself. So we started drawing with just Irvington Theater, and we liked that level of architecture, and then expanded the typeface to a full range of weights, and just making sure that it felt always like a certain width, always stately. So going back to the core strategic piece, we wanted to capture the cultural impact that this institution has, the diversity in offerings, and the idea of time, the idea of like sort of a lot of productions happening. And we find 3 vehicles for each. In terms of sort of the diversity, color papers, and that history of like using different types of really cheap techniques was something that interested us a lot. Then in terms of the sort of programming and sort of the cultural center, there's the wood type was something that really, really interested us, and I'll go into it in a second. And then the final thing is this history of posters and cultural institutions putting posters all over towns. That was one of the main, I'm sure, you know, you've definitely taken a class with Sylvia, but I'm sure you've encountered a lot of these. This is just an image that kind of captures that, but the plastering of the walls and the idea of things overlapping and this cacophony of like typography and color and sound. That was something really, really powerful that we kind of wanted to inherit. So one of the things that we did is I actually have this, a copy of this book with me, but the wood type for Morgan Press, this happened to be compiled like 2 towns away from Irvington. So it was perfect as a way to connect. And we love the idea of wood type and the different ways it spoke and the way it could connect with the actual production. This are typefaces from Pite Foundry, which I highly recommend you look at. And we started using it as sort of the main display typeface. Then the idea of colors, sectioned each type of, if it's a theater play, then it would be blue. If it's music, it will be yellow. If it's film, it will be a different color. And the idea of layering as a metaphor for passage of time. So color signifies what type of production it is, layering when it appears. So connecting all of these things together, you see that as new productions happen, there's a layering that happens and the typography goes on it. And we wanted to make it feel a little bit do-it-yourself. Like this is a little bit on design in the sense that there's only sort of two or three type sizes. And then there's this big sort of very simple display typeface. And the idea was really so that they could produce it on their own going forward, so that we wouldn't have to be always there. And so that it would always kind of have this sort of basic connection to the heritage and the long history of the theater. 1912 it means that it was one of the earliest theaters to be open in the area. And then it creates just a wonderful kind of sort of cacophony of different typographic sounds. As you see here, like it just each event speaks in their own way, but they all feel part of like the larger family. And of course, when we take that into the web, and this is in progress, so this hasn't been published yet, but just the idea of layering as it becomes interactive or as it becomes motion. So just how an Instagram post might look. And these are good ways to kind of expand the brand and play it out. How the ticket at a ticket box would look like, how the postcards would look like. And then again, going back to the core idea, which is sort of just the simplicity of the custom typeface and the architectural piece. So we wanted to speak about the backstage kind of talk, like Act 1, Act 2, and so on. So totes that commemorate that, or things that kind of cue you in that this is a theater, applause, dramatic pause, intermission, or expressions like break a leg, simple things like that. So this was the whole identity. It was published at the end of last year, and it's been in play all throughout. Right now we're gearing up to the next season, which holds a big question mark of like, what's going to happen with coronavirus and everything. So yeah, the final, how am I doing on time?
Andrea, just quickly, but it was very interesting that you told you could hand this project to them in order to let them produce independently whatever they needed. So basically, did I understand correctly? You redesign all these typefaces in the digital so they can use it freely as not only the custom typeface, but also these displays that you show in.
Okay, so the display, so the custom typeface, that was something I designed and sent to them. The display, so what you see in the middle, that is Pite Foundry, P-Y-T-E, who did this project every week. They would, well, it's one person really, Stefan Elmar, who's an amazing type designer. I highly suggest you go see his work. He's been now publishing a lot more than this. But for a year, I think in 2018, all he did is every week, he created a new typeface, and it was all uppercase, and it was based on historical references of what type. So in a way, it overlapped a lot with the Morgan type. What we realized is we just, there wasn't enough time in a day, and especially this being an independent project, to really digitize. I think I would have, I would have loved to do that, but it was way too ambitious. And his typefaces are just so incredible. So it added this layer, which then meant we could just give to them the ability to use it. And he's since seen the project, and it's like, it's been great. Also that type of response, he's like really excited about it. And it's been, a good use and connection, historical connection to why he even digitized these. But yes, the core idea is a simple enough system that would capture the identity, capture the vibrancy, make it a cultural institution, and make it reproducible over time, which is a big question for a lot of clients. Like, you know, you design cool things, and then how do you take them forward? How does it age? How does it evolve over time?
Thank you.
And then final project, and I think then I'll stop for questions. So Raka is, oh, sorry, this is not the project. So I'll stop right after this, see how we're doing on time. There's one tiny project afterwards, but okay. Raka Chocolate, the brand identity. This is a collaboration with Simon Blockley, an exceptional designer I met also at Pentagram. So, you know, I've collaborated with people that I worked with. I collaborated with people that I'm friends with, like people from SPD, you know, who were wonderful friends during SPD, and then afterwards we did, you know, we design identities, websites, like design things together. So always keep in touch and, like, you know, get excited and sort of share. So just as the identity for the site, for the identity for the theater was a project that was mine and I shared, like there's other moments like this one. This was a personal relationship from Simon, who then thought it well to kind of expand it to me and just work together on this. This is how Raka looked before we started. It was perfectly inoffensive. It was, you know, it was actually pleasant, wallpaper, sort of theme on the background, and then these colorful labels. There are a number of problems, but I would say one of the main ones is that they were looking a lot like sort of someone that was copying Mast. Mast Chocolates is on the top left, and at the time when we started this was the biggest player in chocolate in the whole region. Raka was looking to expand nationwide and internationally. So their chocolate is really excellent. So they needed to look like they were their own thing. So what we do is we look at things like structural. You know, this is the identity of a chocolate company literally plays out within the chocolate wrapper. So you need to cross-analyze it, do an X-ray. First thing is all these shapes and position. Those are inherent cues about where the identity lies. The second thing is something that's called shelf obstruction, which is if this is placed on a shelf, look at all the logos on the top. Everyone's going to be able to tell that, you know, it's Dick Taylor, Mast, Compactus, Cho, Hue Chocolate. But Raka gets hidden. So that's a structural problem. So we started trying to solve a few things. One, we wanted to really identify why they were really good on their own. The second thing is why, you know, how to solve some of these technical sort of structural issues, and then build a larger identity so that they could do a number of things, like go to conferences and have their booths designed in a certain way. So really build an identity at large. That started with the packaging. So we started, and I'm showing this, I've never shown this. I don't think Simon has either, but it's early rounds of design. So we started playing with the idea of sort of continuous space and kind of demarcating this like kind of chocolate wave of sorts, and then focusing, and this is a key strategic point, focusing a lot on what the bar actually tasted like. So deep and dark with oat and vanilla, long, juicy with a raisy finish, and so on. And then we went in a completely different direction and we explored these on end. We have tons of sketches, but like, you know, what if we focus on the terroir and like topographical maps? But it felt like a lot of people had done that and we weren't fully in love. And then, you know, kind of bringing it back to, and again, these are 4 sketches of a number of other rounds, but the good thing was kind of just testing out different ideas and different strategic intentions. The bottom one has sort of a UV layer, UV spot gloss, which are the terrain lines. So with light, they react. And then the paper color and the type color correspond to the taste of the actual bar. And we sort of were playing with different ideas. We loved a lot of these, the client loved a lot of these, but we hadn't really identified something that would truly speak to the energy that they were looking for. So we sort of course, kept in mind the one thing that they do. They go directly to farmers, they buy the cocoa, nibs, and beans, and they don't roast them. Every chocolate that you will buy roasts the beans. That means they heat them up and almost like coffee beans, and they make it they extract the flavor that way. Raka had found to unroasted create a chocolate that was delicious. And when you don't roast it, you preserve the flavor, the original flavor that's in the bean. And it just so happens that all of these cocoa nibs taste very different across the world. So what we did is we kind of looked at the sort of typography, but from an eye level, like almost if you were actually in the farm, either picking these or experiencing it. And we built sort of a series of landscapes, and we call these like lands of origin. Well, the CEO called them that way, but we just call them lands. And it's essentially the mountain ridge that refers to the origin, but it also refers to the flavor. So we did that in combination with a redrawing of where the actual label would be. So we shifted the label up and really reconstructed the way it would be. We kept the energy of the original logo, and just drew it in a way that it was monolinear, more contemporary. It still had some variation and energy, but it didn't feel as sort of specific as handwriting. And then we combined that with these lands of origin. So the lands of origin are a way in which we actually looked at photography from each farm, because these are individual farms, and then we traced sort of the hilltops. And then we use the layering to communicate what color or what flavor this is. So if it's coconut milk, then there's a coconut milk sort of series of colors, and has to do with the ingredients as well. Pink sea salt, that would speak to that. So we kind of created this cast of bold, like different colors, but the label itself is very restrained and quite easy to understand on a shelf. And then when you do something like that, you're able to then take it all the way. So the idea of lands of origin, the idea of sort of these mountain ranges, can then mean that we can create a mold that has these sort of depressions in it. And it also helps to break off the chocolate. And as part of their mission to become really transparent, we embedded all the information about like the farmers and how much they pay it against how much the market pays them inside the actual wrapper. This is huge, because this means they're really actually transparent about how much you paid, and how much they paid the farmer, and how that compares, and how long they've been in business. Like, there's a lot of data here that a lot of companies don't release, and we thought this was really powerful in terms of mission. So as a brief interlude, what's the typeface in the middle? What creates sort of the identity? I, a long time ago, had taken this photo, which I found this like beautiful book, and I was like, what is this typeface? And I reached out to Sasha at the Lubalin Center here in New York City, who was also one of my professors at Type at Kufber, and he knows a lot of type. 1970s, like Trooper Roman. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. So I started looking more into the period, and there's things like Perpetua Super or Times Modern, which all have these sort of higher contrast and quite bold presence, and they're meant to be headline design. So I started looking at the letters, and I love the A. There's something about the A, the top weight, that I really liked. And the N wasn't really capturing that. So I redrew it. And the way I redrew it is kept the A very close, but the N sort of takes a different gesture. So on the top right, you'll see that it takes a turn and it kind of stabs in. And it keeps a little bit like, it just connects a little bit better with the top of the A in the sense of how the weight is handled and how it reminds of that A. And that's something that it's a gesture that then is applied across all letters, like the D, all the rounds, and the Q, P, as well as other moments like the tail of the Y and so on. So this had to be an upper and lowercase. And it was a lot of fun to draw and really test. And, all throughout this process, I recommend you send it to people that know what they're doing, in the sense of like, if you're drawing type, send it to someone that has drawn type, like a professional type designer, to get some critique. And I got a lot of critique from Ryan Bugden, who's just a great type designer here in New York. And he really let me know some notes that were like, I was like, yeah, that really makes sense. So it typesearched really well, which meant then for the type of sort of conversational tone we wanted to have, the editorial tone in that label, it was something that would connect really, really well. So as you see it here, it's just, upper lowercase, and then again in the identity. So the identity is really composed by these two elements. One is the visual part of sort of the colorful graphic identity of the lands of origin. And the second one is the typeface. Typeface is creating an implicit kind of combination that is unique and sort of its own. And especially being a custom typeface is something that, you know, only them can use. And we extended this across the product line and sort of into, you know, minis or sort of some of the other product ventures that they have, like this, like where we half-tone the lands of origin for these are work in progress bars. They send them every month. So the idea of work in progress is sort of, you know, the dots haven't completely connected yet. And the typeface, as I said, is something that sort of combines really well with the lands of origin to sort of always give this idea of identity. So this collaboration has gone all the way to the facade. We're currently working on this. So this is highly work in progress, but this is the current facade and they're taking over the space on the right. So we started sketching just type and color and lands of origin. And we wanted to create sort of a powerful moment that would kind of speak to who they are. But the facade is really big. It's like, you know, I don't know how many meters, but it's tall. It's like 4 stories. So essentially, we just wanted to sort of create this statement. What if, you know, in Red Hook, they're in Brooklyn, what if there was this building that almost from a satellite you could see cacao? So we love that. And then the idea of like sort of these melting chocolate lands of origin was something there. So these are some of the final sketches. We're still sketching around. The client themselves have not seen this, but they've seen the previous round, so they know where we're going. So we're really excited about this and just being able to see an environmental takeover of a space. Okay, so Sylvia, do I have time? I think this would be a little bit faster. Do I have time for the last project, or should we stop and just questions? Are there questions?
You can go on.
Okay. So final project, this is another personal project, Odd Apples. And it starts really with a moment in which I meet William. So this is my apartment. This would actually have been the back setting. This is the library and just where we live in Brooklyn, but we're currently not there because of coronavirus. And my parents-in-law are being extremely generous, hosting us here and, you know, taking care of our baby, who's a 1-year-old, and he's like running around. So it allows us to work. But I miss it dearly. And, you know, every time I see a photo like this, I'm like upset that I'm not there. But anyway, William Mullen is an amazing photographer. We met through Raka, and he took some of the photographs in Raka, but he also had this personal project, which were these apples. He had been collecting apples all throughout the United States, photographing them, tasting them, figuring out color harmonies. It was fantastic, but he had done nothing other than create an account on Instagram. And when I saw this, I was like, there's incredible potential here. So we collaborated. And after a few iterations, you know, selecting for photographs, this was like a pool of 300. We came to this. So I did the lettering for the cover and obviously designed the whole piece. Chose a large format, which it's one of my favorite things to do, to just play with the physicality of things and really explore, you know, how that becomes present. And designed this short piece in which sort of his apples would take almost life-size shape. And this was printed in London by Pure Print. And it was really a way to kind of celebrate this amazing wealth of photographs that he had done, and a little bit trace the history of each one, sort of placing them geographically, saying, you know, this is a pristine apple coming from a specific farm and a cultivar, and then giving some taste notes for people that have never been able to taste. But it's called Odd Apples, and I gave it the name Odd Apples because it felt, you know, kind of like, you know, it's not the usual apple. It's like, it's really defying conventions of apples. The printing was just digital on HP Indigo, but the colors came out really vibrant. And then we did an edition of 200. Each one was numbered. And this, we were lucky that it got caught by the New York Times, and it was featured in the Style magazine. And then, you know, obviously handled the website, put together a website. This is on a Shopify thing. So It's really simple, but just, you know, a way to kind of sell prints and sell the actual piece itself. And then as part of all of this, you know, you submit it to your things, and sometimes you're lucky that people appreciate the work. And in this case, the TDC awarded it a certificate. So what happened is this half a year goes on, and then William gets a call, and he's like, "Hey, we want a exhibition in Brooklyn. We want to do an exhibition in Brooklyn with a couple of your prints." And he calls me and he's like, "Hey, what do you think we can do?" And so on. And we start talking and we get excited. And I'm faced with the idea that, you know, maybe type would be a good way, and maybe large type would be really great. And it needs to kind of connect with the identity of apples up until that point. So I remind myself of like this reference, Organda, which is a really fantastic typeface, and it's super geometric, and it plays with the idea of sort of really compact letters and really wide letters. And if you kind of look back into sort of the sort of principles I was using here, I was kind of already playing with that. So I think implicitly that was informing. So starting with a super geometric shape, establishing a little bit of contrast, and then rotating so that it's the nib. It's kind of like, you know, a pen tool going through and creating the shapes. I created all sans. So following those principles, a super geometric construction with a heavy influence from calligraphy. And again, there's a little bit of influence, historical influences from things like Florentine type, inscriptional type, that has like the E's like that, that are really kind of cool. And then, you know, sort of a connection to geometry and a sort of unconventional, sort of, you know, going from really wide to really skinny. It was printed in a specimen that a friend put together, and then finally it became time to kind of, you know, sketch around. So this is like a technical document that you put together so that somebody can reproduce it. So you need to keep the scale correctly and measure everything. So again, this is a personal project. It's just like, I did the best I could. I'm sure if there's somebody that really knows how to do this, they would be like, well, that's wrong. But you know, it got the job done, because then essentially it was put into the gallery, and, you know, all of the things like the type really large, the placement of the photography, and sort of the apples themselves that William brought were really awesome. And we had a launch event, and it was a lot of fun. And yeah, these are fun things that kind of come out of relationships. So I think if you take anything away from the talk, is the idea of relationships, and the idea of like sort of carrying those forward, nurturing them, putting your all into work, because that really goes a long way. And we're currently working on the 2020 version of the book. William has kept on shooting photography, and he now has over like 1,000. So this is just like a portion of those, and we've been selecting all of them, and we're really, really excited about it. So if you want to follow sort of where this goes, oddapples.photo is the URL. There's a sign up link for the newsletter, and that's where we'll announce the book. And the book is going to be sort of a tome. It's actually going to have a little bit of a history of each apple in it. So we're both really excited and working on it. So it's an awesome kind of thing that I think will finish that branch of the work. So yeah, so that is it. Now I will be silent until you ask a question, if there's any questions. But thank you for listening, and thank you, you know.
First of all, thanks to you, Andrea, for being for showing your enthusiasm regarding your work and all the passion that you put in every single project, because working to this detail on the typography on every project is something rare, something that, of course, I appreciate very much. And okay, so all participants can send questions through the chat that I will ask to Andrea as soon as they arrive. Can I start with a more general question while they take their time to consider what they want to ask to you? You've been working with 3 important design studios in New York, and each one of them has a different culture, a different approach to design, to handling clients, handling projects. So what did you learn from that? What's your impression about comparing all of these different approaches?
That's a great question. I would say that the fourth studio that I've been a part of is sort of my own just play outside, and that's also taught me some stuff. At Pentagram, I would say the idea that your work makes who you are. So literally, it's a meritocracy, and it's all like if you work hard, you get more projects, and there's a level of trust that comes from sort of designing and showing that you understand where you can take design. I think a very interesting difference to something like the design studio or a Gretel is the lack of strategy as a practice. So I don't know how much you've all encountered strategy, but it's now become sort of the standard and all throughout design studios. The strategy would be some of the things that as a designer you would do implicitly. You wouldn't really, I don't know, I know that all the designers at Pentagram do it, but they don't call it strategy. But strategy would be the foundational aspect. So for each one of the projects, let's say for the theater, the idea of culture, diversity, time, or for Raka, the idea of the origin and the flavor. Those are the things that are strategic. And then there's also personality. Like, do you want them to be bold and bright, or just more muted and sort of corporate? Like, those are all things that go into the field of strategy. I think designers have been good designers have been very naturally practicing it without calling it that way. But nowadays, clients expect that it's its own phase, and it actually, there's a benefit to the idea that at Pentagram you resolve strategy through design. Design comes first, and you're tackling questions of strategy by showing the client, here's an approachable world. Here's a world in which you become more minimal and more restrained, and so on and so forth. While, let's say, a design studio, you have a whole phase and Gretel, you have a whole phase of strategy. And sometimes it's very distinct from what happens in design. So you sort of conclude that conversation and you align on what the business and the brand is going to do. And it's really powerful, because that means you won't get into really big questions of like, should we be approachable or not? You've already talked about that up front. And you've resolved that. So I think a lot of the partners at Pentagram, like the partners being the top level, they know this and they navigate this and they help clients understand this. But as a designer, there's a time and a gestation period around that concept of really understanding how to navigate that through design. And it took me many years to kind of get to a place where I'm very comfortable of exploring that through design. And now my experience has been one of like understanding how strategy is articulated on its own way, and working with strategists, with people that are extremely bright, access a lot of information all at once. They're like almost archivists and researchers at the same time. And they're really, really exceptional thinkers. And that's where I guess philosophy comes in for me, where it helps me. That's at the level of like process. I think at the level of culture, all of them are open studios, sharing work, and I think some of the most important things are personal relationships that you develop, because you need to create your own circle of trust, that you can send things on iMessage. You send a screenshot to a friend and let them have an opinion, and you listen to them and they do the same to you. And like there's a lot of this that happens quite organically, and you also need to be able to curate it for yourself. And I think all of them have been super talented people, super bright people, and focused on the work. And I think Gretel to me is like a really very, very interesting place. I'm learning a ton. They're very structured in the process, and they have like an incredible amount of talent, and they themselves come from a history of motion design first, and then they now turn into an identity studio. So that informs the way they're shaped and the tier. So it's not like Pentagram, it's very flat. It's got its layers of titles and so on, and it doesn't go against the work. Actually, it helps the work, and they have much larger teams. So I think at the level of culture, there's that. At Pentagram, you get a project like MasterCard International, and it's you and maybe one other person. At a place like Design Studio or Gretel, it's a larger team. And it really involves like 5, 6, 7 people sometimes.
Okay, so thanks, Andrea. There is a question from Carla, and she's curious to know, she wants to ask you, which advice could you give in order to get in touch with this kind of studio that you've been working with? Because, of course, this is a great experience one can have. So
Yeah.
what would be the best advice for that?
Well, I would say, I mean, first of all, if you ever want to shoot me an email, I'm not the best emailer. I'll say it up front. I wish I was better, but just, you know, send me an email, and I would love to kind of chat and talk about stuff. Beyond that, build your own understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it. That's the key thing. And I think, you know, the reason I've been able to be in these conversations is because I give my all at work. And then at the same time, I continue a personal practice where I explore my own voice. I feel that that's been a recipe that's worked for me, and I've seen other people who has also worked for. So it's that combination, that duality. And especially for me in particular, where I was trying to catch ground. As I said, I started on design pretty late. I studied philosophy first, so I was really trying to cover a lot of ground. There were people that have been, you know, designing since they were 18, 19, even before. You know, I had done websites, I had done design, but I really didn't know the formal thing until I was like 23 or something like that. So it's been quite a process of learning, and I've taken every single opportunity as a point of learning. Like, what can I learn out of this project that I did not know before? Is it a tool? Is it a concept? Is it a field? And we're lucky that we're always pushed that way. But I would say for you, build your networks within, like, people that you like, people that you trust. Don't be afraid to reach out. Reach out. Like, we're in a world in which you can just find somebody's email in a second, send them an email. And actually, that's how it used to happen in the past. Like, from things that I've read, you know, I don't know, people like Willie Fleckhaus would call directly, like Emil Ruda, and like they would look him up on the phone book and call. And it was like, there was a really nice sort of openness to this without knowing somebody. The common thread is that you respect design and you really love it. And if you're serious about it and you know what you're asking, then a lot of doors open. And I would say, you know, don't ask, I wouldn't ask for a job. I would ask for a coffee or Zoom date. Just like, you know, present yourself. And it's sometimes nicer to get to know someone than to ask him for something.
Great advice. There's another question from Andrew, and he says, I thought it was really interesting to see some of the historic references behind your type design. I was wondering if you could go into more detail on how you built up your type library and your sources of inspiration.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, really plainly, you have to sort of really set up alerts on eBay and read. I would say read text. You know, read all the text that Sylvia. I think I read a lot of them in classes, but I also didn't get to all of them. And I read them afterwards as I was working on it. They like massively helped. You know, Modern Typography is a fantastic text. You know, there's a lot of things that you can read and access, and they'll give you links and hints. And I would say attend conferences, really important, because people mention, just like I mentioned right now, a bunch of basic text. A lot of other people mention their own text. So then you sort of pay attention, and then you can go find them online. And there's, you know, old bookstores or online eBay accounts that have all of that. And I would say, yeah, just it's vigilance and dedication over time, because you can't get to all of them all at once. But I would say this, a lot of them are online. So if you look up type specimen PDFs, you know, archive.org has a bunch of them. And there's a ton of other online that I have at the PDF. And sometimes I just use that because it's faster. But there's something pleasurable about going through the book, and it's unique. The sort of connections that you make are unique. But yeah, just keep on learning. That's all. I would say, you know, and if you find something interesting, try to find it and invest in it. Some of these books cost a little bit more, but instead of going out for dinner, invest in that, and you know, you'll have an opportunity to kind of have a book like, you know, from the 1912s that somebody or a group of people spent so much time making, and so many people have used over time, and it still has more to give. So I would say that, you know, vigilance.
Well, thanks so much. Are there any other questions while we here? But in the meantime, Carla says thanks very much. She appreciated the suggestion. Oh, could keep okay. Also thanks from Andrew. I could keep going, asking you more questions, but you were already so generous with your time, and you've given so many details regarding the process, the background of each project, and historical connections and so on. So thanks again for that, Andrea. I really appreciated the way you shared your experience with us, and looking forward to meet you next time, to have you in person at SPD. In the meantime, thanks again, and all the best for your next steps in your career.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone. Thank you for taking the time. You know, and you know, keep on going. Keep in touch with these super talented professors you've had, because they're incredible. And make sure, I always go back to your lectures, by the way. Susie, like I think the lectures, I still have them in my desk. Like I still look at them. I think it's really powerful. Everything that you're learning now is really, really important, and it'll mean more as you go. So it's just keep that always there. But thank you again for the opportunity. It was lovely, you know, to speak to you, and hopefully one day we can meet in person. So.
Ciao, Andrea. Ciao, everybody. And we'll see each other at the next lecture. Ciao.